Hey folks, TJ Maloney with the Alabama Republican Party. I want to talk to you a little bit about what's happening on March 13th here in Alabama. March 13th is the Republican primary, not just for President of the United States of America, but it's also for delegate selection to the National Convention and our state primaries for offices such as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Public Service Commission, and one of the Associate Justices on the Supreme Court, and a lot of local offices. But right now I want to drill down and talk specifically about the presidential election and the delegate selection process, because we've gotten a lot of questions. First and foremost, let's talk about the candidates. Here in Alabama, 8 candidates qualified for president. Congresswoman Bachmann, businessman Herman Cain, Speaker Newt Gingrich, Governor Jon Huntsman, Congressman Ron Paul, Governor Rick Perry, Governor Mitt Romney, and Senator Rick Santorum. Now, although 8 candidates qualified, 1 candidate withdrew from this nomination process before we had to certify the results. That was Mr. Herman Cain. So Mr. Cain's name will not appear on the ballot, but all 7 other candidates will appear on the ballot. Another thing that's going to appear on the ballot is the delegates. Now, here in Alabama, we have 50 delegates to the National Convention. We're a pretty big state. I believe we're the 9th largest state in terms of our delegation at the RNC in Tampa this year. So out of those 50 delegates we have here in Alabama, there are 3 types of delegates. First, the automatic delegates. The chairman of the Republican Party of Alabama, the national committee man and woman. Those 3 delegates are automatically going to Tampa. Then when the 47 remaining delegates that will be voted on March 13th are broken up into 2 categories. First, there are 26 delegates that are voted on statewide at large. And then there are 3 delegate slots for each congressional district, for again a total of 47 delegates. Here in Alabama, we have a proportional system. You may have heard the Republican National Committee has set new rules. All states that are going to March have to vote proportionally. Now, we are a proportional state, but we have 2 caveats. First, a threshold. Any presidential candidate that receives at least 20% of the vote on March 13th will be awarded delegates from Alabama. The kicker here in Alabama is that if any candidate receives 50% of the vote plus 1, they receive all 26 statewide at-large delegate slots. That means if one candidate gets 52% and 2 candidates get 22% and the 3rd candidate gets 18%, all 26 statewide delegates are going for that candidate that receives 52% of the vote. Likewise, in a congressional district, if any one candidate receives at least 50% of the vote plus 1, they get all 3 delegates from that congressional district. The congressional districts work just like the statewide at-large delegates, and they're proportional. Now, it's important to note when you go in there on primary day and get your Republican Party ballot that not all the delegate slots are contested primaries. And here in Alabama, only contested primaries show up on the primary ballot. Therefore, if you were running as a delegate in place 1 statewide for George Washington and you have no other opponent, you've already won place 1 statewide for George Washington, and your name will not appear on the primary ballot. However, if more than one person is running for the same spot, then it gets a little more complicated. The Alabama Republican Party rules state that you are allowed to vote for your candidate for president and then go below their name on the ballot and vote for the contested delegate races for that candidate. Therefore, if you vote for George Washington, you go down below George Washington's name and vote in all the contested delegate races for George Washington. Let's say place 1 statewide at large for George Washington, you have Thomas Jefferson and John Adams running as delegates. If John Adams receives more votes than Thomas Jefferson, John Adams wins that delegate slot. And if George Washington gets at least to the 20% threshold and is awarded delegates, John Adams will be going as a delegate to the National Convention for George Washington. I want to talk a little bit about how Alabama is a proportional state. First and foremost, again, there's the threshold. A presidential candidate must receive at least 20% of the vote to be awarded delegates in the state. There's the kicker as well. Any candidate that receives 50% plus 1 receives all of our state-at-large 26 delegate slots. For a moment, let's imagine the same exact results that happened in Iowa happened here in Alabama. For example, using that scenario, with Senator Santorum, he would receive 10 delegates to the National Convention from Alabama. So the delegate winners in place 1 through 10 for Rick Santorum would go to Tampa. Likewise, Governor Mitt Romney would receive 9 delegates from Alabama. Places 1 through 9 under Mitt Romney's name that win in those places would go to Tampa for Governor Romney. And Congressman Ron Paul would receive 7 delegates. So places 1 through 7 state at large would go to Tampa. Again, that's assuming the Iowa caucus results were replicated here in Alabama on the March 13th primary. Using that same scenario where the Iowa caucus results were replicated here in Alabama, let's go ahead and assume those exact same results were replicated in each of the 7 congressional districts here in Alabama. That means out of the 3 delegate slots for each congressional district, Rick Santorum would receive 2 delegates, places 1 and 2, the highest vote getter in each of those places, and Governor Romney would receive 1 delegate from the congressional district. So the winner of place 1 for Governor Romney in each of the 7 congressional districts. We've been asked a lot of questions here in this process, and I just want to answer a few of them if I can. First and foremost, you cannot vote in both the Republican and the Democratic primary on March 13th. When you walk into your voting location, it's your right to ask for either the Republican primary ballot or the Democrat primary ballot, but you can't vote in both. So I encourage all conservative Alabamians to go ahead and ask for that Republican primary ballot. Vote for your candidate for president, vote for your delegates under that candidate's name, and then vote for the best Republican you feel will represent you and our party and our values for each of the offices that are contested on that primary ballot. Another question we often get is, do I have to register as a Republican here in Alabama to vote in the Republican Party primary? The answer is no. Here in Alabama, we're an open registration state. That means when you register to vote, you don't register with a political party. Therefore, even if you voted in Democrat primaries in the past, but you're a conservative and you want to vote in the Republican primary, you don't have to call anybody and re-register. You don't have to go to your probate office or your DMV and re-register. You just go into that voting location on election day and request a Republican primary ballot. Some people have called in and said, hey, I missed the deadline to qualify for delegate, but I really want to go to Tampa with the Alabama Republican Party. What can I do? And some people are going to wake up on March 14th and realize they didn't win their delegate slot, but they still really want to go to Tampa to support the Republican nominee for president. Don't worry, there's still a place for you. This coming June, the Alabama Republican Party State Executive Committee will be meeting. During that meeting, they will vote on a slate of alternate delegates that will accompany the delegates that we elect on March 13th to Tampa, and will be our Alabama delegation as we elect, or as we nominate, the next President of the United States of America. So again, to recap, a couple of the top line issues, if you will. First and foremost, you don't have to register with the Republican Party to vote in the Republican primary. Second, it's your right to request a Republican primary ballot when you walk into your voting location on Election Day. Third, you'll be voting for President of the United States of America, the Republican nomination of course, delegates to the National Convention, and our state primary candidates. That includes all the local Republican primaries that are going on. Republican Party rules state you can only vote for delegates under the candidate in which you vote for president. Again, your ballot will show 7 candidates running for president here in Alabama, although many have already dropped out, and this contest is left between 4 candidates running for the nomination. It's important to note as I close here, each and every one of the 4 remaining candidates for the Republican nomination will be a better president and a great replacement for Barack Obama. And I hope all of you will join us by visiting algop.org or finding us on Facebook and see how you can take part in making certain he's a one-term president. And hope to see you in Tampa.